John Kasich's pragmatic approach to gun control. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Jackie Borchert, State House reporter for Cleveland.com. Julie Carr-Smythe, State House correspondent for the Associated Press. Dale Butland, Democratic strategist. And Terry Casey, Republican strategist. During his career, John Kasich has traveled a winding path when it comes to guns. In 1994, the then congressman voted to ban assault weapons. That got him an F rating from the NRA. As governor, he has signed into law several measures that loosen gun laws, including ones that allow people to carry hidden guns in bars and in daycare centers. His NRA rating jumped to an A. But after massacres in Las Vegas and now Florida, Kasich has evolved again. For the first time as governor, Kasich has announced proposals to tighten gun laws in Ohio. The plan, developed by a bipartisan committee he formed, calls for tightening the state's background check system. It would make it tougher for those who commit domestic violence to get a gun. It would toughen the ban on straw man or third-party sales to people legally barred from owning a gun. It would ban armor-piercing bullets. It would ban bump stocks. And the most controversial item, it would change state law to allow police to confiscate the guns of people deemed at risk for committing violence.
I'm very hopeful that this is a package that is reasonable, that will improve gun safety, that doesn't represent all the hopes and ideas of everybody, but that's not what it's about. You have to be able to celebrate those things that you can come together on that can be done, that can be enacted.
Julie Carr-Smythe, a couple of weeks ago, John Kasich questioned why anyone would need a, quote, God darn AR-15. This plan does not go that far. Did he want to and couldn't?
I think he personally wants to, and I think he wants to do more than is in this package. But this package, as he said, that's not what this is about. This is about, I think, him trying to show Ohio and use Ohio's bellwether status to sort of send a national message on what could be agreed upon in a bipartisan civil type government that he would like to envision.
Terry, he's in a tough spot. He doesn't want to anger the NRA. Republican lawmakers at the State House are certainly not going to anger the NRA. Is this the best he can do?
Maybe yes and no. I mean, part of it, I think this is in many ways more of a national issue, and clearly at the national level it's pretty incomplete. If you looked at the meeting the president had with Democrats and Republicans, he said some things that made some people happy. Supposedly he's maybe backed off some things. The other part of this piece is obviously governors can propose, but it takes both the House and Senate to pass things. And Ohio is a very diverse state, and we see it even in the Democrat primary, where you've got Kucinich and Cordray, two top candidates, very different in their views on guns. So it's part of the discussion, but I wouldn't hold my breath in the next week or two expecting something passed.
Jackie, what are the chances? What's the early reaction from leaders on the House?
Well, we didn't get an immediate full-throated endorsement, which we do get from legislative leaders on some things that the governor rolls out. The Senate and the House leaders have said that they're willing to, look at various proposals. They've said some things that they don't want to consider, banning certain types of guns, raising the age that you can purchase guns. But they are interested, especially in the red flag restraining order idea. A lot of 4 out of the 6 proposals are actually mirroring federal law. So there are things that are already illegal, but local law enforcement can't do anything about them, and the feds have limited resources, and they're not going to go after each of these cases as well.
Yeah, the only thing that was new here is that red flag thing. These laws are already on the books. The feds can enforce them, and they're just trying to match Ohio law to the feds. But the red flag one, where you could have a restraining order to take someone's guns away, that's troublesome for folks who appreciate gun rights or support gun rights.
Well, evidently not to the president, who earlier this week said that we should take guns first and have due process later. But let me just say, as somebody who's been critical of Governor Kasich, oftentimes, I think you have to give credit where credit's due, and whatever his motivation for making these proposals, whether it's actual change of heart or whether it stems from his desire to revamp his image so he can run for president again, whatever the reason, this is a good first step, and I think he deserves credit for it. The problem, as Jackie indicated, is that given the makeup of the legislature, this is not going to pass. Even these modest proposals are not going to pass. And I think it's important for viewers to understand why the NRA, which only has 5 million members in a country of 320 million people, continues to exercise influence out of all proportion to its membership. And the reason is, it's not just campaign contributions. It's that they can mobilize an army of single-issue voters who will cast their ballots solely on that one issue, unless and until people who feel strongly about gun control, or gun reform, I should say, until they're willing to become single-issue voters too, at least for a cycle or two, nothing's going to change and the NRA will continue to win.
Julia, there's been some polling that shows there are some possible changes there. I think NPR had a poll out today that said 65% of Democrats said there would be a consideration they would have when they go into the polls this fall.
Yes.
Do lawmakers see that?
I do think that there is sort of a start of a sea change happening here. We're seeing these young people from Parkland kind of rise up in a way that hasn't happened in the past. I mean, when we had Newtown, what we had was the parents of small children, which was different than having a young generation of newly 18-year-old voters coming out and picketing and protesting.
To Terry's point, Dale, on the Democratic side, it could be an issue. It is an issue between Richard Cordray and Dennis Kucinich. Cordray does not go as far as banning the AR-15 as Kucinich wants. Is that going to cause problems for Democratic primary voters? Could it cause problems for Cordray if he doesn't go that far?
Yeah, there is a wave. There is a gun reform wave building. Dennis Kucinich is the only candidate on the Democratic side who's in a position to ride that wave. Now, whether he can or not, whether he'll be able to raise the kind of money necessary to do it, I don't know. But the point is, Richard Cordray, who's somebody I've known for a long time, and I don't say this with any great pleasure, but Richard Cordray has an A rating from the NRA. He is unwilling to even have a conversation about banning assault weapons or limiting magazine size. Dennis is. He's making that a major issue in his campaign, and I think it is very possible that that this may be a real horse race.
And Dennis has also stirred the pot on issues like fracking. He wants to ban all fracking in Ohio. So
Mary Taylor and Mike DeWine both criticized Governor Kasich's plan. Of course, they're the candidates for governor on the GOP side. Might their stance come back to haunt them in the general election? It's certainly going to help them in the GOP primary, but when it comes to the general, saying no gun laws, no gun changes at all.
I don't know that it's that big. I mean, the problem, Mary Taylor's got the biggest problem. First of all, her campaign, trying to raise money, trying to get endorsements, she's not doing very well. But on one hand, she wants to brag about how close she is and supported by John Kasich, but then she wants to run from some of these policy things. And I think the other thing, and it might tie into the next topic, people forget John Kasich, in a way, is a politician, but he's as much or more a policy wonk. And so to a certain extent, and it's good that Dale has praised him, he likes to dig into the minutia of some of these issues, and you do need to look at the details.
Why doesn't Mike DeWine say, I support Governor Kasich? He's the clear favorite in the GOP primary. He could say, these are reasonable steps, I support them, but he didn't do that.
Well, there's a lot of debate on how they would really work, and why get too far out front on something when you're not sure how it's going to go in the legislature. Remember, the legislature doesn't have that many weeks of session left. So again, that's why I don't think too much is going to happen. It's good to have the discussions, but nothing's going to happen magically in the next few weeks.
All right. Meanwhile, speculation continues as to what John Kasich will do when he leaves office in 10 months. He looks like he's laying the groundwork for another presidential bid, traveling the country, making national TV appearances. Politico this week reported Kasich and his team are seriously considering making an independent bid for president if he finds President Trump unbeatable in a Republican primary. Terry Casey, what are the chances of an independent bid by John Kasich?
Well, when you read that Politico article, it's a whole bunch of unnamed sources. And then at the very end, when you dig through it, you see a bunch of other people referred to that basically throw cold water on it. I think you originally built this segment of, is Kasich go on a GOP primary, an independent, or a rocking chair?
Yes.
He doesn't want to go the rocking chair, but I think he just wants to keep the cards on the table. He wants to be part of the policy discussion. But he's also pretty realistic, because I think to CNN, he basically said, I've run for president twice. He understands the challenges of raising money and doing the other things in primaries. So I think it's mainly he wants to stay involved, he wants to stay active, he wants to be in the policy discussions.
Dare you buy in that?
Well, to me, it's pretty simple. I think Kasich clearly wants to run for president again. If by 2020 President Trump's approval rating is underwater, not just with the electorate as a whole, but with the GOP, Kasich can then take him on as a Republican and say that this is the way we save the presidency. If, on the other hand, the GOP is still the party of Trump by 2020, Kasich would have to run as an independent, but I think he'll only do it if he's got pretty good polling data showing that a third-party candidate has a reasonable chance of being elected.
The bottom line is, Julie, it's hard to run as an independent, and it's hard to beat an incumbent, certainly from within your own party. So John Kasich is in a bit of a bind here.
He is. I think he's waiting it out. I mean, I think there's another, maybe third option, which is that there is a party with a certain platform that's bipartisan. That's been talked about, that, you know, he would run a bipartisan ticket of some kind, do something very weird, because he hangs around with Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, and they make a lot of policy. Just this last week, they made some policy recommendations on healthcare. They've talked about immigration. Now he's talking about guns. He's building a sort of a portfolio of these moderate positions, and I think that it's possible, in addition to single issue voters, we might see voters who are going to vote on the issue of bipartisanship and civility, and where are they going to go?
And Jackie, he's positioned, John Kasich is, if Trump decides not to run or can't run again.
Right, that's another option. Although, you know, recent reports have showed that that's not where he's at right now.
Yep.
That, you know, they're still raising a ton of money, and things are already in motion for that next election.
Here's the wild card. If Trump does not finish his term and Mike Pence becomes president, that's the wild card that would almost certainly put an end to Kasich's presidential ambitions, because the party would almost certainly rally around Pence as their best hope for retaining the office in 2020.
You know, Gerald Ford took over for Nixon, and they didn't win that election. Reagan still ran against him in 76, or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that right now, to the extent that you have a split party, you have a civil war within the Republican Party. If Trump leaves, Pence becomes president, I think there will almost certainly be a rallying around him.
But Mike, as final point, if you build a house on a foundation of what if, speculation, and guessing, that isn't a very good house. And you don't run for president just on that kind of speculation. Unless you can really raise the money and be effective, he's not going to run.
Yeah, speculation is our job here.
Right. Well, the media does that very well.
Yes, we do. During his tenure as Attorney General, Mike DeWine took on doctors who prescribed too many opioid painkillers. Then last year, he filed suit against drug manufacturers in connection with their role in the opioid crisis in Ohio. Now DeWine has filed suit against drug distributors, including Dublin's Cardinal Health, Ohio's largest publicly traded company. In a statement, DeWine said these companies ignored their duties as drug distributors to ensure that opioids were not being diverted for improper use. They knew the amount of opioids allowed to flow into Ohio far exceeded what could be consumed for medically necessary purposes, but they did nothing to stop it. Cardinal Health responded by saying the company has been cooperating constructively in a good faith effort to alleviate this public health crisis and save lives. We are extremely disappointed that Attorney General DeWine chose to go outside of these established processes at this critical moment in time to file an unfounded lawsuit. Now, Dale Butler, you're in a unique position. You worked closely with the drug industry back in the fall during the Price campaign. You also oppose Mike DeWine. Who's right here?
Well, first of all, I would say to you that I think that Mike DeWine's move is very politically astute. And it is because, remember, the opioid crisis in Ohio exploded under his watch as Attorney General. So he's vulnerable to the charge that he was asleep at the switch while this incredible crisis engulfed us. By filing suit against not just the drug companies, but the distributors as well, and getting as much publicity as he can in the process, I think what he's doing is he's trying to turn a vulnerability into a strength. Now, whether it'll be successful or not is another story, because the Democrats, of course, say you're too little, too late. You were fiddling while the state burned. So we'll see what comes out in the end.
And Dale kind of misses the point in 09 and 10 when Strickland was governor and Cordray was attorney general, was when an awful lot of this stuff was really starting to ramp up. But I think CBS Sunday Morning did a very good piece interviewing DeWine, a lot of people in Ohio. And I think he's on the right track, because the drug distributors have a hard time explaining why they didn't miss that certain counties in Ohio were just going through the roof in sales, totally disproportionate to the population.
But
Jackie, go ahead, Judy.
But you did have to wonder at the timing of the original suit that Mike DeWine finally filed against the opioid, in the
Manufacturers,
pharmaceutical,
yeah.
right? Because he had been in office already 7 years. He was either about to announce for governor or had just announced for governor, and so the question was, why not 7 years earlier?
And Jackie, this announcement seemed very low key. When Mike DeWine announced he was suing the manufacturers, he had a news conference, he was on TV. This was just a press release in the lawsuit. Now, he did meet with Attorney General Sessions the next day, but he almost seemed reluctant to go after one of the state's largest companies. You can see the reluctance there.
Well, yeah, and they are definitely a presence in Central Ohio, and I believe have also contributed to campaign funds as well. The Political Action Committee and executives with the company. I wondered about the timing too, because Mike DeWine likes to hold press conferences, and I don't know if it was a timing thing that he was in Washington or not, but that was the big question last year, was why aren't you going after the distributors? And at the time he said that they hadn't felt they had built enough of a case to do it at the time, which, at the time other entities had sued the distributors. So.
Yeah,
One thing to watch is in Cleveland, there's a federal judge and a Clinton appointee who's got this case. Legal insiders have told me he's very good. And if I was a drug company, I'd be worried, because when you've got a skilled judge to navigate between the egos and the money and the power, it could be adverse to the drug companies. And Mike DeWine, when he first announced, said, I'm giving them 30 days to come to the table and talk about things. They really didn't want to do that, so they got to suffer the consequences.
But I think it was very wise for him to sue the distributors here as well, because if anybody watched that 60-minute show some time ago, it was pretty clear that it was the distributors like McKesson, Cardinal, and there was a third one, I can't remember the name of now, who are the real villains here, in the sense that, yes, the drug companies made the pills, but these distributors were shipping literally millions and millions of pills into tiny villages and towns in Ohio and West Virginia, where they knew that the local population wasn't big enough to consume that number of pills. So going after them, I think, makes sense.
But they argue that they can't be held responsible for the actions of the people taking the pills and also the doctors who are over-prescribing them.
Right.
That's an argument that can be made for any. Should a gun manufacturer be held responsible for a failed shooting? Should a car manufacturer be held for reckless driving?
Right, and I think there's plenty of blame in the opioid crisis all around, but this was one prong that really hadn't been gone after.
And there is precedent for it with the tobacco settlement as well.
And also, if you're running a bank and you've got one customer that's getting unusual amounts of U.S. cash and you can't figure out how they could use that much, you should wake up and realize maybe there's a problem legally, because drugs are highly regulated, and when you're the distributor, you've got some responsibilities.
As Terry mentioned, Dale Cordray was Attorney General when this was beginning to get going, the opioid crisis in 2009 or so. What responsibility does he face in this crisis?
I think holding Rich responsible for this is going to be very, very difficult, because this crisis really exploded over the last 7 years or so, and that's when I think it's really come to full fruition. And I think, as I say, that Mike DeWine has some vulnerability there. He was the Attorney General during this time, and as I say, I think the Democrats are going to try to point out that there was a real failing here on his part. DeWine, that's the reason he's filed these suits, right, is to try to get on top of this issue and to try to do jujitsu here.
Let's get to our last topic. Payday lending limits may return to the ballot this fall. We voted on this once, In 2008, a law that capped payday loan interest at 28% easily passed, but the industry found ways around the law. And critics say payday lenders, now known by different names perhaps, charge interest rates of up to 600%. With a bill to close the loopholes stalled in the legislature, advocates are collecting signatures for a question on November's ballot. Jackie Borchert, why didn't the 2008 law fix this?
Well, you know, the 2008 law passed, a bipartisan bill that passed, and the industry fought it with upwards of $20 million against it. And Ohio voters overwhelmingly said, well, we want this law, we want these restrictions in place. And what happened was the lenders decided to register with the state under a different type of lender that existed in the law. So they weren't then subject to the cap, the interest rate cap that was set, and were able to continue business as usual.
What was to keep folks from doing this again after this law?
Well, part of it, when you write laws, and this applies to gun laws as well as other things, you got to write them very carefully, and you got to think, how will the lawyers and the smart brains try and maneuver around it? But writing laws is not always easy because you got the other side trying to figure out ways to get around it.
I haven't looked at the specifics on it, but I presume that they're going to close the loophole in the way that the pending legislation would, so that the industry is more of an umbrella category, so it can't get around it.
I'm struck by the fact, though, that this bill has been, as you said, Mike, at the outset, stuck in the legislature. You know, after voters spoke as loudly and as clearly as they did on this issue, I think it is a disgrace that the Ohio legislature has not put an end to predatory lending once and for all. And I think it's just one more example of how too many legislators are willing to trade their consciences for campaign contributions.
And part of it also is going to depend on how many signatures and who's really gathering the signatures, because if the legislature feels the heat that these people are really gathering signatures, they don't want that kind of thing on the ballot. So we'll see how real they are in being able to get enough signatures to attract attention.
Now, Jackie, the argument is that some folks in poor neighborhoods, low-income folks, rely on these to get them through a couple days. And if you use it properly, the payday loan can help tie you over until you get paid.
Right. The problem is that most don't just take out one loan. They can't pay it by the, you know, if they need to go to a payday lender the first time, odds are they're probably not going to be able to pay it off within the short time frame that they need to pay it off. So when the due date comes around, their next paycheck, they still don't have the money, so they have to roll it over into a new loan. And that process continues, and that's how you get to like 600%, you know, APR. And the industry has said, you know, that they provide a service, and there are a lot of Ohioans who don't have bank accounts or, you know, need to use these services. And the advocates would say, you know, consumer advocates would say that other states don't have the problem that Ohio has. They've put in some restrictions, and the industry still operates there.
Right. Let's get to our off-the-record final parting shots. Terry, you're up first.
Well, if you live in Clintonville, as I do, or parts of Franklin County like Dublin, New Albany, Worthington, you live in Delaware County, Licking County, buy now a bigger mailbox and get a bigger tape in your home phone answering machine, because by April, the 12th Congressional District is going to be flooded on both sides with so many campaign messages, and the TV stations, it's going to be, the 12th Congressional District is going to be a Wild West show, both Republican and Democrat primaries.
Dale.
I think the conventional wisdom that Richard Cordray is going to win the Democratic nomination for governor in a walk may be wrong. As I said earlier, there is a wave building with regard to gun reform. Kucinich is the only candidate on the Democratic side who's in a position to surf that wave. If Kucinich can raise enough money to be competitive, which is a big if because he's always had trouble in that regard in the past, I think we are likely to have a real race on the Democratic side for governor.
Julie.
I would just say that the governor gave wide breadth to the legislature on this gun package. I don't think they're going to do much with it, and I think he'll have to follow through on his pledge to twist some arms a little bit later down the road.
And Jackie.
I think we will see some payday lending reform. I think it might be a situation like we saw with redistricting, where the first crack at it is not really appealing, but maybe, you know, they can work at it, because if there's one thing that lawmakers don't like, it's something on the ballot that would take their power away.
Yep. Donald Trump this week officially announced his campaign, or launched his campaign for 2020, named his campaign manager Brad Parscale. I predict that Brad Parscale will not be the campaign manager for Donald Trump when Election Day rolls around in 2020. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. Continue the discussion on Facebook, on Twitter. Get episodes on demand at our website, wosu.org/COTR. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.